Hello everyone. We are very excited to have you in attendance today. Thank you all for joining us on this webinar and educating yourselves on the important subjects that we are going to cover. Now before we get started, I do want to take care of a few housekeeping items. When you registered for the webinar, a packet of information was sent to you to the email that you registered with. In this packet, you'll find additional information on the speakers, some other resources, and some relevant content. So please feel free to look through that packet. At the conclusion of the webinar, there will be a 5 to 10 minute Q&A session. Please take advantage of this session, as it could be some of the most valuable time you get with a top lawyer. Now, due to limited time, we might not be able to address all the questions that you all have. You will have the opportunity to email us or schedule a call to address your specific question if it is not answered. Now, also at the end of the webinar, you will be sent a link to a survey on your email. Now, this survey is especially important to us for you to fill out because we want to make sure that the information we are providing to you is both relevant and what you're looking for. You will also have the availability, if you like to discuss your specific situation, you have the availability to schedule that call in the survey link as well. Now, during this presentation, we're going to be discussing a few main topics. The first one will be estate planning. So whether you have your estate planning done or it's on your list of things to do, we'll be discussing important legal documents such as wills, trusts, power of attorney, and how they can help your family. Now, after reviewing many estate plans, one of the common things we see is that a lot has changed since the original estate plan was created. Now, these could be personal changes, they could be legal changes, or maybe both. One of the other common things we see is that many people miss out on one of the most important steps of the estate planning process, which is actually funding the trust. So we're going to provide you with this information, and then you can take the information and decide for yourself whether your current estate plan is meeting your current needs. Now, an estate plan is especially important to have in place in case of an emergency. However, if not created a certain way, it might not give you a whole lot of protection in the case of someone going into a long-term care situation. Now, once you turn 65, the chances of you needing long-term care in some capacity greatly increases. Home care, assisted living, nursing home, they all come with many different choices, and a lot of the time families don't know all the choices, nor do they have the answers to the questions that spark up from all these different choices. There's also the cost of the care itself. So when you're thinking about these things, you should ask yourself some important questions. What kind of care would you prefer? Who's going to pay for the care? How will they pay for the care? Who's going to help in the facilitation or coordination of the care efforts? So the two speakers are going to be talking about legal and financial strategies to hopefully answer some of those questions, and then also maybe things you should consider when thinking about protecting your assets from long-term care expenses. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, attorney Mike Thomas. Mike Thomas is an attorney and lifelong resident of Flint, Michigan. He is a graduate of Kettering University, the Michigan State College of Law, and Walsh College with a master's in taxation. He began his practice in 1976, and his practice emphasizes planning and elder law. He has completed more than 8,000 estate plans, hundreds of Medicaid plans for nursing home residents, and hundreds of VA plans for wartime veterans. He has served or continues to serve on several boards of charitable institutions, including the Baptist Children's Home and the Michigan Association of Christian Schools. He has devoted his legal practice to the integration of biblical principles and with legal principles. So please help me in welcoming attorney Mike Thomas.
Hello and welcome to our Asset Protection and Long-Term Care Planning Seminar. I'm Mike Thomas. I'm going to be your presenter today, and let's get right into it. Today we're going to find out how to plan ahead to protect assets in the event long-term care is needed, and how to crisis plan if right now it's too late for you to plan or you didn't bother to plan ahead. And the reason we do that is because 50% of people over 65 are going to spend 6 months or more in a long-term care facility. Biggest risk to your estate that exists. And the biggest problem you'll have is this: I don't believe that's going to happen to me. I can't picture it. Neither can I, but I'm going to show you how it can happen and how I've planned for myself. Question: do you have a trust? Think about that as we go along. And do you know how you'd pay for long-term care expenses if you had these? We're going to take a look at that today. Here's our agenda. We're going to look at basic planning everybody needs. What is long-term care planning and how do you do it? What happens in a crisis if you don't have a plan? How much does it cost to do this? And what do I do next if I want some more information? And then we'll have question and answers with Andrew at the end. Okay, basic planning for almost everyone, and this really should say everyone. First thing you need is a comprehensive durable power of attorney with HIPAA authorizations. Now, HIPAA stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. That was amended in 2003, ostensibly to protect us from evil insurance companies, and while Congress was at it, they protected us from our evil spouses and our evil children. So what they did was they privatized all medical records. And now it's a $10,000 fine if a medical professional gives information about your condition, your treatment, or your medication to anyone, including your spouse and your children, without a HIPAA authorization. You got to have that. A comprehensive durable power of attorney is simply one that you don't download from the internet, but it's one that allows for the transfer of assets to protect your assets from being depleted, allows for your power of attorney to apply for benefits, to take money out of IRAs or transfer those, to file actions for you. You need something that's comprehensive. If you have single children who are adults, they need this too in case they have a tragedy so that they're not stuck without having any help. Medical powers of attorney with HIPAA. Now, a medical power of attorney is simply a durable power of attorney that is only to make medical decisions. And it's only effective and only good after two doctors say you can't talk to them anymore. So it's for your family to take care of emergency medical situations. And it also has HIPAA authorization, which is important. Revocable living trust. We're going to talk about trusts a little bit later, briefly. But basically, a self-trusteed revocable trust would be Tom and Mary Jones form a trust. Tom and Mary Jones are trustees. We either transfer assets into their trust, transfer real estate into the trust, or we transfer it by beneficiary designation into the trust when they die. It avoids probate, does some other things, but it doesn't protect you from long-term care expenses. Ladybird deeds. Now, a ladybird deed is a deed with a beneficiary. These became effective about 2010 in Michigan. If you go into a nursing home now and your house is in your trust, it's not an exempt asset. So you have to take it out of your trust, put it in your name for it to be exempt. Now, the reason for that rule is the state wants you to die, probate your house, and then they'll come after your house for the Medicaid that they paid on your behalf. But if you have the house in your name, it's exempt, but you have a beneficiary to your trust or your kids, there is no probate. No one can ever come after your house when you die. That's why we use that tool. DocuBank. Now, most of you have never heard about DocuBank, but let me just pose this to you. Tell me if you agree with this. And I'm not going to hear you, but go ahead. Emergencies happen on nights, holidays, weekends, and vacation. Isn't that right? And on nights, holidays, weekends, and vacation, I'll bet you don't have your powers of attorney with you. Well, I do because I have DocuBank. Let me tell you what DocuBank is. DocuBank is a service, and if we sign you up for DocuBank, which we would, we'll do an extra original of your medical power of attorney, HIPAA authorizations, living wills, which are good in some states but not in Michigan, a list of people to contact in an emergency with their cell numbers, and your medical history. Now, if you go to an emergency room, it's really, really important that if you're on blood thinners, somebody knows about that. If you've had some hip surgery or implants, they know to give you antibiotics. If you're a diabetic, they know. That's important. Here's how DocuBank works. We send all that information to DocuBank in Pennsylvania. They scan it in, and then they send you a card. And this card has a member number, a PIN, and an 800 number. Now, at my son's suggestion, I put all that on my phone and texted it to my kids so they have that information. Now, if you're hospitalized anywhere, anytime, anybody from any place can call the hospital, get the fax number, call the 800 number on the DocuBank card or on their phone, and the computer will walk them through steps to get information, the member number and the PIN, the fax number at the hospital. And within 3 minutes, your medical power of attorney, HIPAA authorizations, living will, list of people to contact with cell numbers, and your medical history is faxed to the hospital 24/7. I had to do this with my wife about 4 years ago when she had some shoulder surgery, and it works. $54 for 5 years. You can afford this. Now let's take a look at long-term care planning. Long-term care plan is simply a plan to protect your assets, keep your home and keep your assets in the event you have long-term care expenses, so you don't lose everything you have. Now there's plans that don't work, and I have people come into my office every week and they have, oh, I've got things all set because I have my kids on my stuff in joint name, or I have them beneficiary designated, or I've given them stuff. Well, these things don't work. Let me show you why. Joint ownership. Now, if you have real estate, joint tenants with rights of survivorship, and you die, that automatically goes to whoever survives, and it avoids probate. If you put your stocks or other assets in joint name with kids, for instance, the same thing happens. You die, everything goes to the survivor, there isn't any probate. However, there's some problems with joint ownership. What if the child that you put on your assets is sued? Well, that can affect your assets. What if he becomes disabled and he needs to get benefits, but he's got his name on your stuff? What if your child gets divorced and your daughter-in-law really wants to cause you some trouble? What if your child gets greedy? And I had this happen to a good friend of mine. His sister, whose name was on stuff with mom, decided she was going to take half of the assets and split the other half among the other kids because mom told her to, mom who had Alzheimer's. What if your child gets mad? I had a lady who went into an assisted living facility. We needed to sell her house to pay for her care. And her son was on the house and he wouldn't consent to do that because he was mad at his mom. What if your child dies? See, joint property works. I tell people if nobody gets sick, nobody gets sued, nobody dies out of order, nobody gets greedy, nobody gets mad. Other than that, it's fine. And here's what it doesn't do. It doesn't protect your assets from long-term care expenses. Now, I'm going to tell you the same thing about the next two items we're going to talk about. These probably will work. If you look at statistics, well, probably this will be okay. But here's the issue. When you're dealing with your entire estate, probably doesn't cut it. Certainly cuts it. And when I do planning for you, you know with a certainty, no matter what happens, your assets are going to be protected. And what you want to happen to them is going to. Beneficiary designation. Now people tell me, well, you know, I got my kids as beneficiaries. On my IRA and my life insurance, I have to have them as beneficiaries. What's wrong with that? Well, nothing. When you die, if you want to avoid probate and get the stuff right to your kids, that's fine. But what happens if one of your kids dies before you? Do you know where that share goes? Well, no. Okay, well, probably your financial advisor doesn't either. The company decides, and here's one of the two things they're going to do. They're going to pay the other kids who are surviving as beneficiaries, or they might pay it, and then the grandkids don't get any money, or they might pay the estate. And if they pay the estate, it's going to go to his spouse or his wife, which you may not want, and it won't necessarily get to the kids. What if he's getting a divorce and he gets money from a beneficiary designation? What if he's a spendthrift and he just blows through money? That doesn't plan or protect the money for him. What if he's filed bankruptcy? I had a kid come in to see me. I didn't do planning for his mom. She left him as a beneficiary on her annuity. He had been 2 months out of bankruptcy and he gets this check from the annuity company. He had to give it back to the bankruptcy trustee because it was within 6 months of his bankruptcy. Your child becomes disabled. That could mess him up if he gets a large lump sum of money. Beneficiary designations probably will work. Certainly may not. And here's another thing. They don't protect your assets from long-term care expenses. That's what we're talking about here. They don't work. Gifting doesn't work. This is a pet peeve of mine. Financial advisors, attorneys, accountants, they all get this wrong. I have people come in to see me and we're going to want to protect their assets, and they say, well, look, I can give away $15,500 a year per person without any gift tax, right? Well, yeah, but it has nothing to do with Medicaid or protecting your assets. That's for gift tax. Let me tell you how gift tax works so we can get rid of this topic. I do a revocable trust to shelter assets. We're going to talk about those in a minute. Now, if I take $200,000 and transfer it into an irrevocable trust, you don't get any gift tax exclusion, so the whole $200,000 is subject to gift tax. Here's how the IRS calculates the gift tax. They take the $200,000 and they subtract it from your $11.4 million exemption. And you only have $11.2 million left. Is that a problem? Well, not for most of us. So we're not going to talk about gift tax anymore, but I will say this. If you have over $11 million in assets, two things are true. One, you need to see me to protect your assets. Two, you're eligible to adopt me. One of these days I'll get somebody to take me up on that. But let's look at gifting as why it doesn't work. You gift money to your kids, they own it. It's theirs. What if you need it later? What if you went in a nursing home and you had to have the money back to be eligible for Medicaid so we could shelter it? Oh, I spent that. I didn't know I was supposed to hang on to that money. I put an addition on the house. I went on vacation. Now that happens all the time. It's subject to a 5-year look back. So if you give money to your kids within 5 years, still yours. And if they've spent it, too bad for you. And if your child gets sick or sued or dies or gets a divorce, your money's gone. Will gifting probably work? Well, I wouldn't even say probably. Maybe. But it certainly might not. And by the way, it doesn't protect your assets from long-term care expenses. So here we are. Those things don't work. What does work? Well, a living trust is a part of the plan. And as I've told you, living trust is the same as owning your property. When you fund the trust, either the trust owns the assets and you're the trustee, so you own them, or they're going to pass into the trust when you die, one of the two. And then you die, the trust avoids probate because the trust stays alive and your successor trustee, one of your kids, takes over and follows the instructions. The problem is that doesn't protect your assets against long-term care expenses. But we will use it as part of the plan, which I'll tell you in a moment. Well, let me give you some good news and give you some bad news. Good news is we're all living longer. The bad news is 50% of us over 65 are going to spend some time in a long-term care facility, which you're not picturing right now and you may not believe is going to happen to you. But you know what? People come into my office every week who didn't think it was going to happen to them. And now all their assets are at risk. It's the single greatest risk to your estate. Shouldn't you plan for the single greatest risk to your estate? If there's a 50% chance you're going to lose your estate? Yeah, you should. Okay, long-term care, let's look at that. The definition of long-term care is you've been 3 months either in a nursing home, having in-home care, or being in assisted living. That's just the definition. What are the reasons we plan for long-term care? I'm going to give you 3 that I think probably apply to most of us. To protect your life savings. Most people are motivated by, I want to protect my money. Okay. I have some clients, my older clients, they didn't get anything from their parents. They want to make sure their kids get an inheritance from them. So they want to shelter some money to make sure that happens. That's an admirable goal. But here's the most important one. Take the burden off your family. Let me tell you how this works. I have people come into my office, maybe a spouse with her kids, or maybe the daughters, and they've been taking care of their spouse or their dad or mom, and they're just exhausted. They got to the point now where we just can't do anymore. Here's a statistic that'll sober you. 2/3 of caregiving spouses die before the sick spouse. 2/3. Because emotionally and physically, you're destroyed trying to take care of this person. So here's this family. They're in my office. We're going through their information. And I'll stop sometime during the discussion and I'll just ask this question. Tell me, how you doing? And then I reach for the Kleenex box, because they're not. They're just totally destroyed emotionally. And most of the time, I will just ask them a question. You mind if I pray for you right now? Prayer works for me, and it works for them too, calms them down. And then I tell them, look, here's what's going to happen. We're going to protect your assets. You're not going broke. We'll take care of all that. You just go take care of your spouse or your parent who's in the nursing home or assisted living. That works. And if you want to do a favor for your family, plan ahead for this type of a situation, and it takes a huge burden off them. Please do that. How much does it cost for long-term care? Well, I'm glad you asked. You probably know this. In-home care is the most expensive, around 14 grand a month. Assisted living, around 5,000 a month, depends on how much care you need, depends on where you are. As you get more towards southeastern Michigan, the price goes up. Nursing homes, $10,000 average, and I'm seeing them now in our area over 12. Now, how long would your life savings last if you had to pay this money? Speaking of that, how do you pay for long-term care? Well, usually it comes down to you're going to pay privately, and that would be using your savings and maybe having to sell your cottage up north, whatever. Maybe purchasing long-term care coverage or getting VA benefits to help. Now, VA, it will help with maybe assisted living or paying some part-time long-term care, keep you from going broke that way. It won't take care of nursing home because you don't get enough. I'll talk about that in a minute. Or you can become Medicaid eligible if you're in a nursing home. I can help do that, and I do it all the time. So here's some options to consider. You can buy long-term care insurance if you're going to private pay. Now, I used to recommend this all the time, and if you have an old policy that has no limits, I'd keep that. But long-term care insurance has disadvantages. The premiums go up. You have a 90-day waiting period. You have to prove that you're disabled. If your kids are taking care of you, they won't pay. And if you don't use it, your money's gone. It's an expense. You can invest in a long-term care investment. I've done that. And you can shelter assets, if you can't do either one of those, for Medicaid expenses, which I can do. Now, let me tell you about a long-term care investment briefly. Alex Dinser is going to talk about these in a moment. But it's an investment, not an expense. About 10 years ago, when I met Alex Dinser, he showed me that my life insurance policy was going to eat itself up by the time I'm 80. So we traded it for a long-term care hybrid policy, which never goes away. Premium always stays the same. And I can draw down the death benefit to pay for my care. Any kind of care, in-home care, assisted living, nursing home. I don't have to prove disabilities. I don't have to go through the gyrations of waiting 100 days or 90 days. They just send me a check. I have $11,000 a month available to me for 4.5 years. Now here's what that does for me. I don't have a pension like many of you. I just have a 401k. And if I use that up because of long-term care, what's my wife going to live on? Well, she's going to live on my 401k because I'm covered. Now, do I think that's going to happen to me? No. But I plan for it because there's a 50% chance. Now, what if I live to be 87 and I die without using this? My wife gets the equivalent of a 10% annualized return on what I paid in. That's not a bad deal for getting long-term care coverage, is it? Call Alex Dinser. He can help you with this. VA benefits. Now, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time on this. If you're a wartime veteran or the spouse of a wartime veteran, you're eligible for VA benefits of anywhere from $1,200 to $2,200 a month to help you pay, and usually it's for in-home care or assisted living. And it'll make the difference for some of my clients between spending all their money or cash flowing the care and saving their money. It's pretty important. Problem is you have to qualify for it, just like Medicaid. You have to have a medical need, expenses that exceed your income, and net worth less than $128,000. You say, well, I only got $90,000, I'm fine. Well, no, you're not, because net worth includes your annual income, pension and Social Security, includes your spouse's annual income. If you're living with your kids, it includes your kids' annual income. Oh, whoa, so this isn't as easy as it looks. No, it's not. That's why you need help qualifying for VA benefits, and they can make a huge difference to you. We usually use an irrevocable trust to pre-plan. There's a 3-year look back on transfers to make you eligible for VA. I'm going to talk about irrevocable trust in a minute. Now let's talk about Medicaid, because that's an important issue. Medicaid is the most misunderstood area of the law I've ever encountered. And here's the thing. If you get sick or one of your relatives gets sick, everybody's an expert. Everybody can tell you something about Medicaid. And here's what'll happen. Probably there's a grain of truth in it, but the result is totally wrong. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to my website, thomaselderlaw.com, and scroll down about halfway, and on the left side there's a little picture, and you just click on that. That's a 10-minute video that dispels the Medicaid myths you have. It'll save you tons of trouble and grief in the future. Now, just to put it in perspective, how long this is. If you're watching a half-an-hour TV show and you watch my video during the commercials, you'll be done at the end of the show. It doesn't take very long. Watch it. Medicaid qualifications. All right, how do I get on Medicaid? Do you have to be broke? Well, according to the regulations, somewhat, yes. But you don't have to be broke if you let us plan for you. Here's the assets a spouse gets to keep if her spouse goes into a nursing home. She gets to keep the house, the car, and half of the rest of the assets up to $128,000. Now let me tell you how this works. Just to give you an example. Let's say you got a house, a car, and $100,000. The wife at home gets to keep $50,000. The husband gets $50,000 for spend down. He has to spend that down before he gets Medicaid. What if he had $300,000? The wife gets her $128,000. The husband has $172,000 to spend down. Well, it gets pretty serious now. We shelter the $172,000. That's what we will do. I'd rather do it in advance because you control the money. But we can do it in a crisis, which I'll tell you in a minute. What if you're not married, you're single? You can keep a house, a car, and $2,000. Holy smokes, you say, well, okay, we can do that. We'll spend some money for mom and we'll keep the house. Well, who's going to pay for the $400 a month for the taxes, utilities, and insurance on the house? Oh, well, there's another problem. You need Medicaid planning to take care of those situations. We use an irrevocable shelter trust, I call it. And basically, it's a trust that you don't own, you're not a beneficiary, and your kids kind of run it. Now, we transfer assets into this trust that you're not going to use. You know, I had a lady, she says, I've got nieces and nephews that don't have any kids. I want to leave them $200,000. Boom, we put it in an irrevocable trust. She kept the rest of her money. Now, if you put money, your assets, most of your assets in an irrevocable trust to shelter them, your pension, your Social Security, checking, savings, that all stays the same. You keep what you're comfortable with. And the rest goes into this trust. Your kids are usually the trustees. And if you want money from the trust, you ask them, they take it out, put it in their account, and then they give it to you. Now, I ask people all the time, do you trust Johnny to give you money if you need it? And they say, yes. And I immediately say, well, I don't. And then I tell them the backup provision. We have a trust protector provision in our irrevocable trusts. So if your trustee goes south on you, me or anybody you pick like me, a trust protector, can make him give you the money. So it's always there. Now, I've never had to do that, thankfully. Now, if you put the money in an irrevocable trust, there's a 5-year look back. In some cases, we can beat the 5-year look back, and those would depend on your situation, which I would talk to you about. But once you get down the road, let's say you get 4 years down the road and you go in a nursing home. Well, the most you would have to pay for is a year in the nursing home. That's the most. And if you had $400,000 or $500,000 that we couldn't shelter otherwise, you're never going to spend it. Pre-planning makes tons of sense. What if you don't pre-plan? You have a crisis. Don't give your money to your kids. That creates a Medicaid penalty. Don't pay your kids to take care of you unless you have a Medicaid-approved caregiver agreement, which we do. Because if you pay your kids and go in a nursing home, Medicaid will say, oh, you gave money away. You get penalized. You're not getting any Medicaid. When they're just helping you. So you've got to know the rules. Now, if you're single and your crisis plan, you're in a nursing home, you come in to see me, we can do a gift plus an annuity, which will save maybe, depending on how much your income is, 50 to 60%, 70% of your money. We can do burial space. Now, burial space is very particular to Medicaid regulations. Basically, what it does is it allows you to transfer money to a holding account and hold it there, and you get to keep it, and you get it back, 90% of it back, when your parent dies. But we can shelter between 50 and 80% of assets for single people. If you're married, most of the time we can keep all the money for your spouse who's at home. But we lose control of some of it, so I'd rather plan ahead. And note this, you can't do this at home, okay? It's just way too complex. And also note, only a handful of attorneys in Michigan know how to do this. And in Genesee County, probably 4. So how much does it cost to do this planning? Well, if you're going to do a basic trust, which we would use, maybe $1,800, married $2,000 to $3,500, depending on how complex you want to get. Now keep in mind, we use this, here's what we use this trust for. If you're going to put your assets in an irrevocable trust, you say, well, what if I want to change where they're going when I die? Well, in the irrevocable trust, we will say, my assets will be distributed according to my revocable trust. And then you can change that anytime you want. So you control all the money in the irrevocable trust. Cost for VA planning and Medicaid planning, because we're doing about the same thing with an irrevocable shelter trust, between $3,000 and $5,000. Again, depending on how complex we have to get, what kind of properties we have. Now the fees for crisis planning, my fee is about 1 month worth of nursing home expense. If your nursing home is $9,000, I'm going to say pay me $9 and don't pay the nursing home anymore. That's a good deal, I think. And most of my clients think that. Now I have people come in, and this happens quite often, who just don't have a lot of assets, but they got too many to get any help. And I just can't in good conscience charge them my regular fee, so I might charge them half or 20%. But I'll do something they can afford, because my goal is to make sure I benefit you way more than I cost you. And if you price me against other people, I'm probably middle of the road. Which brings me to some free advice. Now, I know what you're thinking. Free advice is worth what it costs. Well, maybe. You tell me what you think. Avoid bargains when you're buying parachutes, scuba gear, and doing planning for your estate. Because you don't want the cheapest thing you can buy. You want something that really works. So you're going to get something quality. And that's what we are. All right, here's what we've learned so far. Basic plans most people need, like your powers of attorney, what long-term care planning is and how you do it, common plans that don't work, like joint property and beneficiary designations and gifting, how to obtain VA benefits, we just gave you an introduction to that, how to plan to shelter assets from nursing home expenses using this irrevocable shelter trust, what it costs if you want to do that stuff. So what do you do now? Say, well, okay, I'm convinced I really need to get some more information. What do I do? Well, we can set up, and Andrew's going to tell you how to do this, an estate plan review. If you already have a trust, we'll go through it. We'll tell you what it does and what it doesn't do and how to get your assets protected. If you don't have anything, we'll just start from scratch. And you'll get a written review, you will know exactly what it costs before you do anything. If you have a Medicaid situation, you've got a loved one who's been diagnosed with dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, has some kind of health compromise, and you think down the road, this person could end up in a nursing home, we need to do some planning. If you've got a loved one in a facility now, you need some counsel now. So Andrew's going to tell you how to set up a 15-minute conversation to see if you want to go any further in protecting your assets. Thank you so much for watching today, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Mike, for the great presentation. I know that was a lot of information, and everyone's situation is different and very specific. If you are interested in scheduling a time to talk about your specific situation with Mike, he is an excellent attorney, and he'd be more than happy to help you out. You will have the opportunity to do so, to schedule that time at the end of the webinar. So, let's go on to our second presenter. Name is Alexander Dinzer. Alex is a certified financial planner and a managing director with Horizon Advisers. Alex began his career in 2007 with MetLife before graduating with his bachelor's degree in finance from Western Michigan University. He then continued his studies at Oakland University to achieve his CFP designation. Currently, Alex now teaches at Oakland University, which is in the same CFP program from which he graduated from, and he has also earned the designation of Chartered Financial Consultant with a focus in estate planning. Alex is an accomplished financial planner with a dedicated aspiration to help each person he encounters. He has been mentioned in several national publications, including Our Detroit Magazine and Investment News. So please help me in welcoming Alex Dinzer.
Hi, my name is Alex Dinzer, Managing Director with Horizon Advisers. 13 years ago, I started my practice as a financial advisor. Prior to that, I spent 4 years at Western Michigan, graduating with a degree in finance, and I did also a stint in Balad, Iraq. Going to Iraq really made me grow up fast, and when I got out, I was ready to get a job. So I started interviewing at all the different financial services companies that are around the area, and I decided to go work for Snoopy. Many of you probably know who Snoopy represents. Well, I didn't really know who Snoopy represented at the time. MetLife, though, one of the largest insurance companies in the world. And I went in on my very first day of training, and what do you think they started training me on? Exactly, life insurance, disability insurance, long-term care insurance, and I was sitting there in the room thinking, what did I just hire into? Because the last thing in the world that I wanted was to be an insurance salesman. I just spent 4 years busting my butt to be a financial advisor, to have a finance degree. So I decided to really focus on investments, building portfolios, doing financial planning with people, but I refuted the insurance aspect of everything because I didn't want to be looked at as an insurance salesman. And I was 22 years old, and I mean, let's face it, when you're 22, you live forever and you're absolutely untouchable. Well, so I started doing the financial planning with a lot of different people, and what I realized very quickly is that most of the people I was working with, retirees and people that are getting ready to retire, they all had very similar objectives. Number one, they wanted to earn a safe rate of return on their money. Number two, they wanted to pay the least amount of income tax they could. Number three, they wanted to have a good estate plan in place, and they didn't want their assets tied up in probate or anything like that. And the last and most important thing that they would always say to me, they look me in the eye, they'd say, Alex, no matter what, don't ever let me run out of money. This is all that I have, this is all that I've saved, and it's your job to make sure that this lasts forever. Now that's a lot of pressure on my shoulders, but I would say, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, no problem, this money will last forever. This financial plan that we have in place, we're using very conservative assumptions. You have Social Security, you have a pension, your money's gonna last for a very, very long time, and when you're 90 years old, you're gonna leave all this money to your kids. This plan is bulletproof. Well, what I didn't realize is that the plans I was building and the plans I was putting in place were not bulletproof because I was leaving out the most fundamental part of financial planning, which is risk management. And it took something to change my perspective for me to change the way that I plan. And as I get older, I'm a true believer that our perspective really drives our behavior. And when I met my wife, Jessica, my perspective changed. And it changed because I got to meet her wonderful grandparents, Mickey and Pat. Now, Mickey and Pat, they were like a lot of other hard-working Michiganders. They worked for Ford Motor Company for 30 years. At the age of 55, they decided they had enough. So they called up Joe, their advisor at Morgan Stanley at the time, and he said, "Hey, Joe, we'd like to retire, but just like everybody else, we don't know if we've saved enough money. We don't know if we have enough resources to make it work. Can we come in for a meeting?" He said, "Come on down for a meeting." So they sat down with Joe, and they went over all their objectives with him. They said, "Joe, we'd like to earn a safe rate of return on our money. We'd like to pay the least amount of income tax that we can. We'd like our money to go to the right people at the right time. We don't ever want to run out of money, Joe, so please take that into account. And also, we have another caveat. We'd really like to fund our grandkids' education. Do you think that's possible?" So Joe plugged some numbers in the computer, came back to him and said, "Congratulations, you guys worked hard, you saved, you have Social Security, you have a pension, you can absolutely retire. Go home and tell all your kids you're going to retire, and go tell them that you're going to help fund college." They were absolutely elated. The next day, they filed their paperwork with HR. 30 days later, they were retired. Everything was going exactly as planned. They bought a condo in Florida. They had the place in Michigan. They were funding the 529 plans for their grandkids, and everything was going exactly as they thought. Until one night, Pat woke up and found Mickey frantically getting dressed in front of the bed. She said, "Mickey, what are you doing? It's 2 o'clock in the morning. Come back to sleep." He kept repeating himself, saying, "Pat, I have to get ready for school. I'm going to be late. I have to get ready for school. I'm going to be late." And she kept saying, "What are you talking about? It's 2 o'clock in the morning." Finally, she realized that he wasn't getting what she was saying. She took him to the window and said, "Honey, look, it's snowing outside. They've canceled school. Please come back to bed." So he went back to bed. They woke up the next morning. Mickey didn't remember a thing. Pat figured he was sleepwalking, and they laughed it off. Well, this went on to happen again and again, even having to call over their son in the middle of the night to calm him down because he had no idea where he was. He was disoriented, and finally they got him to go back to sleep. This is when they realized that something was not right. So they called up Dr. Long, and he was a memory care specialist, and he went in for a series of different tests. A week later, they got the most shocking phone call of their lives. At the age of 57, Mickey was diagnosed with dementia. The family was shocked. Mickey and Pat were shocked. But nobody had any idea that this was only the start of a 13-year long-term care journey. Now, Pat is one of the most loving and committed spouses that I've ever met in my life. And she vowed to take care of Mickey for as long as she possibly could. And she did just that. For over 7 years, she gave her blood, her sweat, and her tears. But it got to the point where she would leave and she would come home and he'd be nowhere to be found. And she'd have to drive around the neighborhood to find him wandering around. And when she tried to get him back in the house, he'd be combative. And he'd be turning into the complete opposite person that he ever was. This is when she realized that it was no longer safe for him or for her, and that she was forced to start exploring different options. So they started taking visits to the different facilities, and they ended up settling on the Villages of Dearborn, which is a facility that has independent living, assisted living, and a memory care unit. They sat down with the coordinator, and they determined that the most affordable way that they can move forward would be for them to move into independent living, where Pat and Mickey would be able to live together, but they'd be able to have the staff that's available there if she needed them at any point during the day or night. The cost to do this would be for them to sell their home, make a $250,000 down payment, and start paying $6,000 a month. But this was their only option. So they sold their home, they moved in, and they started paying the $6,000 a month. Well, as you can imagine, his condition continued to get worse, and he was forced to move to the assisted living wing with memory care. And the cost went from $6,000 to $9,000 a month. And eventually, when he forgot how to walk and talk, he was moved to the full-time 24-hour memory care unit where the cost was over $12,000 a month. Eventually, at the age of 70, he passed away and he went on to a much better place. The total cost of their long-term care journey was over $590,000. All of their hard work, the savings, the discipline they had to put the money away was all wiped out. I start with this story because, number one, it's real, and number two, it gave me the perspective that I needed to realize that we're not invincible, that we don't know what tomorrow brings, and that we have to do good planning and take these different risks into account. And so I'm going to go through, over the next 20 minutes, some different ways that you can protect yourself that you've probably never heard of. And I'm going to go through things quickly, and so if there's any questions afterwards, please reach out to us for more information. A little bit about our firm. We are a young firm with a lot of experience. So currently we have 11 financial advisors, we have 4 CPAs, and a tax preparer. And we have office locations in Troy, Farmington, Southfield, Plymouth, and Flint. We're an independent financial planning office and associated with Voya Financial. Where we see that we're different than a lot of other financial planning firms is we work in coordination very, very well with other professionals. And so we have the tax side, but if our CPAs are not a good fit for our clients or they already have a relationship, we work very well with our clients' CPAs. And our attorneys, our estate planning attorneys that we work with are some of the best around. And what we've found is that when all the professionals are talking together, the people's plan is much more coordinated and they have a much more successful result. And that, I feel, is what we do much differently than a lot of other professionals. So step number one in long-term care planning is to have a plan. So if you're watching this right now, you can ask yourself, do you have a plan? Normally when we do these presentations live, in person, what we find is that normally about 2 people in the room, or 10% of people, actually have some type of long-term care plan in place. Step number 2 is to communicate that plan once you've developed it with your friends, your family, or the person that's going to be in charge. That's not only just your long-term care plan, but that's also your estate plan. I can't tell you how many times I sit down with one of my clients who's in their 50s and I say, hey, have you talked to your mom and dad about their planning and making sure that everything's set up right? And I'll get the response, my dad, he's so old school, he will not tell me a thing. And I just say, listen, it's going to be your problem one day, so you need to take charge now. You need to deal with it. It just takes one issue, one thing not titled properly, for everything to not be right and to have to go through probate, which is not something that you want to do. So step number 3 is determine how will you pay for long-term care if one of these things is to happen. You know, a lot of people have pensions because we live in Michigan and we have a lot of different companies that offer pensions, but those things don't really exist anymore. People have Social Security, people have savings. Some people have saved enough, but for the majority of people in the middle, they're the ones that are going to be affected the most. Those people that have saved nothing, the people that were not disciplined and never really saved a dollar, they're taken care of. And the government's going to cover their cost of care. But everyone else, the people that saved, that worked hard, that were disciplined, are going to have to spend down almost all of their money before they're going to get any type of assistance. And so ask yourself where you fall in that category. Strategies to fund long-term care is you could save a lot of money and self-insure the cost. We normally see that you would have to have a couple million, $3 million, but then again, it all depends on your lifestyle. So if you're spending a lot of that money, then that's not a good strategy at all. You can care for your loved ones with your time and your health, and I'm going to cover that in the next slide. You can rely on your children to provide care. Most people's kids are all over the country, and they're very busy with their own lives, and most parents don't want to burden their families. You can spend down all of your assets and rely on Medicaid, which is not the best strategy at all. Or you could use advanced legal planning techniques, which we use often with our attorneys to shelter assets. But that all has to be done ahead of time. And the other thing about that is that when you're sheltering assets and putting that money away, those assets in that type of care is only going to be provided in a nursing home. So Medicaid planning, it has to be taken into consideration. It's not going to pay for in-home care unless you can qualify for a Medicaid waiver, which is very difficult. And the last one is you can transfer that risk to an insurance company. And those are really all of your options. Alarming statistics, and this is why you don't want to care for your loved ones with your time or your health, is that 40 to 70% of caregivers are clinically diagnosed as depressed, with more than half of those having major depression. 23% of caregivers that have been caring for a caregiver for over 5 years report their health as fair to poor. And the last and most alarming statistic is that 70% of caregivers over the age of 70 die first while caring for a loved one. And I watched this personally with my grandparents. My grandfather, we owned a florist shop growing up in Novi. And my grandfather and his 4 brothers owned it before my father and his 4 brothers. And every single day, my grandfather would come into the greenhouse and he'd walk around and he'd water flowers, he'd get his exercise, he'd get out of the house. And when my grandmother got sick, he stopped doing everything. He stayed home every single day and cared for her. And his health deteriorated just as fast as hers did. And he was perfectly healthy before that. And so if anyone has seen this, you know that that is true. The family legacy is a lot of things that people don't always think about because we're always living in the moment. But the family legacy is something that is important that we find to most people. Because most people, I think, would rather see their money go to family or friends or a charity than be all spent on a nursing home or medical bills or things like that. And so we always ask our clients to think about taxes. How will that reduce your legacy? You know, we're doing a lot of planning right now around taxes because we are in, historically, some of the lowest rates that we've ever seen in our lives. And so things like Roth conversions, things like planning for the money to pass down more efficiently, and then with the passing of the new rules around how children inherit IRAs, all of that has changed. So as of December 31st of 2019, if you pass away anytime after that, when a non-spouse beneficiary inherits an IRA, it's no longer the ability to stretch out that IRA over that person's lifetime. The new rules state that by the end of the 10th year, that IRA must be liquidated. There's no rule or law that's in place that they have to take a distribution out every single year or that it has to come out over 5 years. So really that person could wait until the 10th year to liquidate that money, or they could liquidate it all in the first year. What do you think 99% of kids do when they inherit mom and dad's IRA? Well, of course, they liquidate it in the first year because they need the money, right? They want to buy a boat, they want to buy a cottage, they need the money for college because they didn't save enough. And so if you can make it so it's more tax efficient for your kids in the future, think about doing that today. Will your inheritance be liquid or illiquid? Meaning, you're going to leave real estate, you're going to leave stocks or bonds, you're going to leave gold bars. I mean, all of that stuff needs to be planned out. And when you don't have a plan, it's just whatever is left, and normally it's a mess, and you probably could have done better if you had a plan in place. So what we focus on doing with our clients is to help them identify what we call the never money. And the never money is really a bucket of money that you probably will not need based on your lifestyle and what you're spending unless you needed care or unless you gave that money away ahead of time before you passed away. And so helping people identify their different buckets can help you have a lot more efficient plan as well. So this is one of my favorite slides, and this basically sums up my entire presentation. But what are the risks? I mean, every single person out there that drives a car insures it, at least most people do and should at least. And most people also who own a home have homeowners insurance. But the fact is that most people have been paying on their homeowners insurance their entire lives and really never have made a claim probably substantial enough to get back all of their premiums, but we still pay those premiums every single year, every single month. Now, do we have to have homeowners insurance if our house is paid off? No, of course not. Do we have to have full coverage on our vehicle if our vehicle's paid off? No, we can have PLPD. Ask yourself, is your car worth more than your life savings? Is it worth more than every single thing that you've worked hard for your whole life? To put away, to be disciplined, to save the money, to go without? Is it worth more? But you would probably insure your $20,000 vehicle for full coverage, but you don't insure your retirement. Think about that in perspective. There's a 1 in 80 chance of using your homeowner's insurance. There's a 1 in 40 chance of using your automobile insurance. And 1.47 in 2 people over the age of 65 will need some type of long-term care assistance during their lifetime. For some people, it might be 2 months. And for others, it could be 2 years. And for others, it could be 5 and 10 years. The question is how long will it be for you? And the answer to that is nobody knows. And so when you think about what you have, doesn't it make sense to protect what you have in the most efficient and effective way that you possibly can? We're going to show you how. We're going to talk about traditional long-term care versus hybrid long-term care solutions, which are the 2 different solutions that are available today. And the hybrid solutions, they're not even really new anymore. We've been talking about this stuff for 10 years, but people are not talking about this at all. And we're going to fill you in on what they're about today. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that with traditional long-term care, that's going to be like your homeowner's insurance. Technically, it's an expense of yours, right? Because if you don't ever use it, there's nothing really you get out of it. Same thing with your homeowners. You can pay your premium for that year, and if you don't make a claim, you don't get that money back. And for hybrid solutions, these are going to be more like investments, where the money you put into it, you will get back something, whether it's what you put into it or maybe even more. And so defining what an expense and what an investment is important when you're thinking about how we use our monies. So traditional long-term care is like your homeowner's insurance, like I said, which everybody insures their home. And it's a very similar comparison is you're not going to drive home and hope to make a claim on your homeowner's insurance hoping your house is on fire, right? You're not. But having that coverage gives you peace of mind, helps you sleep at night. With long-term care insurance in general, whether it's a hybrid or a traditional policy, the way that you qualify to start receiving payment from those policies is if you're unable to perform 2 of the 6 activities of daily living. Now, these activities of daily living are eating, bathing, dressing, toileting, transferring, incontinence. Dementia can also be an automatic qualification. So if you think about these activities, they're pretty much what you do on a daily basis. You wake up, you go to the bathroom, you walk to the bathroom, you go to the bathroom, you get dressed, you eat, you bathe, all those different things. If you can't do that without substantial assistance, your policy is going to pay out and start helping you cover expenses. With traditional long-term care, there are a lot of strengths to these policies. It's pure insurance, so it's like term insurance. It's the cheapest form, and it'll also give you the most amount of coverage, but for one reason or another, people just don't like it. It's going to provide you a large pool of dollars that you can use tax-free for in-home care, assisted living, or a nursing home. So essentially, you're going to be paying a premium. Maybe it's $100 a month, maybe it's $200 a month. It's as much money as you want to pay for as much coverage as you want to have. And so if you pay maybe $200 a month and you have a $200,000 pool of money that you can use tax-free to pay for in-home care, assisted living, or a nursing home, you can do that by not being able to qualify for 2 of the 6 activities of daily living. The weakness of these policies and why most people today don't buy them is, number one, because they listen to advice from their neighbor, who has no idea about insurance and they listen to the advice of their aunt or uncle or whomever, right? I mean, except for the professionals. But the other weakness is that the insurance company can raise the premiums on a traditional long-term care policy if they're experiencing large amounts of claims. Now, do you think that the premiums have gone up on people? Everyone should be shaking their head because they have. And they've gone up a lot. And there are companies like General Electric, which owns a company called Genworth, which is a large insurance company, who was one of the biggest suppliers of long-term care insurance companies in the marketplace, almost was on the verge of bankruptcy because of their long-term care division. They were suffering billions of dollars of claims that had unlimited benefit periods from policies. And as a result, number one, the company almost went bankrupt, but number two, they raised the premiums on people's policies multiple times. And it's not just Genworth, it's almost all long-term care companies out there had to do that because the policies were priced not correctly. You know, long-term care is a newer form of insurance. Life insurance has been around for hundreds of years. Long-term care has been around for maybe 50 years. And so they didn't have the studies, and let's face it, we're living a lot longer than we did 50 years ago, right? I mean, 50 years ago, the average life expectancy was probably 68 years old. And now, if you're over the age of 65, you have a 50% chance of living to age 90 if you're a female and age 84 if you're a male. Sorry guys, we don't live as long. So these policies can raise your premiums. The other thing is if you don't lose it, you lose it. And there's a lack of competition among carriers. So you can pay your premiums every single year, and if you wake up one day and you're an angel, well, there's no refund. But that's insurance for the most part, right? Hybrid policies are where most of our clients and people that come to us see the most value. And whether it's just because the fact that they're going to get something out of it no matter what, that they buy it, or because they want the protection, I mean, I don't know, but I think it's more the investment aspect personally. So what these are, in this example, is a life insurance policy that has a long-term care rider attached to it. And what that says is that if you get sick, you can now draw down that death benefit that was when you took it out for somebody else, right? Because life insurance is always for your spouse, your kids, your family, somebody else. But now you can use that death benefit for yourself to pay for in-home care, assisted living, or a nursing home. So that solves, number one issue, which is if you pay your premiums and you get nothing out of it. So now if you pay your premiums, you don't need long-term care, a tax-free death benefit pays out. The second thing is there's a lot of different insurance companies offering products. So competition helps drive down cost and increase efficiency. That's in any business. So that's the thing. There's underwriting flexibility, and you also have the aspect of guaranteed premiums. So most of the products out here have guaranteed premiums where you know what you're going to pay from the very beginning, and the insurance company cannot raise the cost on you. Most people in retirement like to know that they cannot raise the cost because they're on a fixed income. So that's another great aspect of the hybrid policy. The weaknesses is you can't wait until you've had 3 heart attacks and a stroke to go get the policy. That's the rule of adverse selection, where people that are unhealthy are the people that want to get insurance, and then that's why there's underwriting to get those people out of the pool so that costs can remain constant. So weaknesses is you need to be somewhat healthy, and there's less customization options than maybe on the traditional side. However, with medical technology, we're able to insure people today that have a multitude of issues. So if you have diabetes, you're insurable at a pretty decent rate as long as it's controlled. If you've had a heart attack, you might be insurable if it's been enough time. If you've had cancer, the same thing. So all these different aspects of medical technology have allowed people to still qualify for insurance later, which I think is important. I'm going to go through a few case studies very quickly so you can understand exactly how these things work. So Mr. and Mrs. Jones attended a workshop of ours not too long ago, a couple years ago. Mr. Jones was 69 and Mrs. Jones was 66. They had good assets. They were really good savers. So they had saved a lot of money in IRAs. They had saved $750,000 in IRAs. And they also had an after-tax, like a bank account with $100,000 in it. They had 3 children, and their goals were to leave their kids as much money as they possibly could. They loved their family. But they were concerned about a couple things also. Number one, they were concerned about the fact that the boys would have to pay taxes on every single dollar inside that IRA. And they wanted to make that more tax efficient for them. Concern number 2 was that all of Mr. and Mrs. Jones' money in that IRA was invested in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, and he remembers what the balance was in 2008. And the balance got down to $375,000 because he lost 50%. Can we pick and choose the year that we're going to pass away? Absolutely not. And so he was concerned that he'd maybe pass away in the wrong year, that the markets would be down and the kids would inherit a lot less money. And then his third concern was that he was completely unprotected if something did happen. He watched his parents have a long-term care event and was very worried about it. And he also had another issue that wasn't really an issue, but he was approaching the age of 70 and a half. Now the RMD rules have changed, and so now if you had not turned 70 and a half prior to January 1st of 2020, you're under the new rules, which now says that you don't have to take out a required minimum distribution until you're 72. So he was going to be forced to pull out $26,500 a year from his IRA, of which he did not need that money. And so before he met us, his plan was to take that money from his IRA and just reinvest it back into a brokerage account outside of the IRA. So he's going to take it out, pay taxes, then reinvest it. But that didn't really help the fact that his money was still all in the market. And so we coached him and said, hey, what if you did something a little bit different and you took that money that you don't really need and you bought yourself some protection through a hybrid life insurance long-term care policy. So what we did is we recommended for Mr. and Mrs. Jones 2 different policies. On Mr. Jones, a $300,000 policy with a long-term care rider that would allow him to pull out $72,000 per year tax-free for in-home care, assisted living, or a nursing home. If he used up every dollar in that policy, the policy would pay out for 4.2 years. That's just doing $72,000 times 4.2 equals $300,000. So every time he pulls out the money, it reduces the death benefit dollar for dollar. For Mrs. Jones, he recommended a $400,000 policy on Mrs. Jones. Why did we do this? Because females live longer, and Mrs. Jones had good longevity in her family. So given that her death benefit was going to be $400,000, she'd be eligible to draw out up to $96,000 per year. She could take out less money every year, which would then make the policy last longer. But if you did the math and she took out the maximum amount every single year, it would last for 4.2 years as well. So the premiums combined for these 2 policies were $17,280 per year. And they were going to be able to cover themselves for $700,000 of protection and or a legacy if they did not use the money. And I always ask people when we're in a live presentation, is this $17,000 an expense or an investment? And normally half the room gets it right and half the room gets it wrong. But I'm going to tell you that this $17,000 is an investment, because if you don't use the money for long-term care, the death benefit still pays out tax-free. And so that is why it's an investment, because an investment should be something that you put money into, and hopefully you get back at least what you invested and more, right? I think everyone would agree with that. So for all those people that wanted to do the math, for all the engineers out there, we did the math for you. So assuming that Mr. Jones took out the policy and he's paying $8,300 a year for a $300,000 benefit, and let's just say that Mr. Jones lived a long and healthy life and he lived until he was 87 years old, he would have put in $150,000 into this policy. If he woke up and was an angel, the insurance company would be obligated to write a check for $300,000 tax-free to Mrs. Jones or the next beneficiary in line. Now, the rate of return that he would have to receive if he said, Alex, you're crazy. I'm not going to buy insurance. I'm 70 years old. That's stupid. He would have to earn 8.57% every single year on that $8,300 investment. So meaning if he took $8,300 in 2020 and bought as many shares of Apple stock as he could, and then the following year he bought another $8,300 worth, and then another $8,300 worth, over that period of 18 years, the average rate of return would have to be 8.57. That's not bad, I would say. And everyone may have a different opinion on that. For Mrs. Jones, we did the same math. Remember, she was younger at the time she bought it. And if she lived till 87, she would have put $213,000 in to get out $400 with an internal rate of return of 9.68%. And that's the tax equivalent yield. So what we call this is production on our money. And number one, we don't buy insurance to be an investment, but it can and it could be an investment if you qualify for a good enough rating and if you don't put in more money than you get out. That's just basic, simple math. But there's no way that I know of, and if you know a different way, please call me immediately, to turn $8,300 into a specific amount of money overnight. And so to illustrate this, if you did not take the recommendation that would have given Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and you took $8,300 and you bought Apple stock, what would it be worth in 2020? Well, who knows? It's probably worth less right now, given the markets. But the point is that it's uncertain. And you don't ever want to create a risk management plan with any uncertainty at all. You want it to be certain. You want it to be 100% certain. If you put $8,300 and you bought a policy, how much is it worth the very next day? It's worth $300,000. So if you needed care and you had a stroke, you have that pool of money available to you day one. And if you passed away, unfortunately, you have $300,000 that's going to go to the beneficiaries the next day. That's how powerful this type of coverage is. And that's why you buy insurance. That's why you do any type of planning, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. That's why you don't wait to do estate planning. You don't wait to buy insurance. You do it right now, and that's how you be prepared. With Mr. Smith, he was 78 years old. He came to us. He had an old insurance policy that he was paying $2,700 a year into, and he had a lot of cash value in $123,000 and a death benefit of $150,000. So in 2001, they changed the insurance tables. And they changed them for the better. Insurance is a lot less expensive than it was prior to that. And the reason being is because insurance is based on mortality. And before then, like we had already mentioned, people didn't live as long. So now, with people living longer, the actual cost of insurance is less. And so he had a policy he had bought a long time ago, back in the 80s, when things were a lot more expensive. And as a result, had a bunch of cash value in there, which he never intended to use. He intended to leave this money to his wife and his kids one day. So what we recommended for him, and he was not the healthiest guy at all, is we transferred that $123,000 over to a new policy, which bought him a $251,000 death benefit with long-term care for the exact same premium. Yes, the cash value is not going to really be there for his use, or it would be, but it's at a reduced amount. But he didn't need it, and he wasn't planning on using it anyways. Unfortunately, we did lose Mr. Smith a couple years ago. And so he only had this policy for about 4 years. And he passed away, and his wife used that extra money to give it all to her grandkids. So she took the extra $100,000 that this new policy gave her, and she gifted it to her kids. And that was one of the most meaningful things that she could have ever done. The last couple that we've worked with is Mr. and Mrs. Fox. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Fox, they were single, they weren't single, I'm sorry. They were married, but they had no children, and they wanted the last check they wrote to bounce the day before they died, right? They didn't have anyone to leave to anybody. And they were good savers. They were young, though. They had just retired, 62, vibrant, full of energy. And they had $150,000 in the bank. They had $75,000 in an IRA and $100,000 in a brokerage account. So the $150,000 in the bank, I said, how much is that paying you? They said, not much, about 1%, maybe 0.5. And I said, well, actually, it's paying you -3 because you have to factor in inflation. They said, oh, I guess you're right, yeah. They also had, Social Security, and they had a pension, and they were living just off of their income, right? So they had the Social Security and the pensions coming in, and they were living just off that. And I said, well, what happens if one of you guys needs care? And they said, oh, well, we got the money in the bank, we got the brokerage account, we got the, we'll pay for it with that. And I looked at Mrs. Fox and I said, Mrs. Fox, what if Mr. Fox needs care first and he uses all the money up? What are you going to do? She goes, I didn't really think about that, Alex. That's a really good question. So what I said is, how about we look at something like this? We looked at repositioning some of the money that was in the bank earning nothing into a fixed annuity that has a long-term care rider. Now, we're not really big fans of annuities in our office, and we only use them in the right circumstances because a lot of people are just selling annuities out there because they pay high commissions. We're only using them if they serve the right purpose. And so for this situation, it made sense. What this annuity would do is they'd put the $100,000 in. It would pay them a nominal interest rate, which is anywhere between 1% and 2% a year, nothing really extravagant. But what it did is it tripled the deposit and created another bucket of money that would allow either one of them to draw on it or either one of them to draw at the same time to pay for long-term care services. And that's in-home care, assisted living, or a nursing home. So now they turned $100,000 into $300,000 overnight, and they still retain their asset. So if they get down the road and they want to cash out the money, they can cash it out and go to the casino or go spend it or go on a vacation. They can do whatever they want with it. Now, if they cash it out within the surrender period, they have to pay a penalty, but we explained that and they understood it. The biggest benefit of it, and again, is that there's no way to turn $100,000 into $300,000 overnight. The reason why you buy insurance is to protect you from tomorrow. And also, the $100,000 that was in the bank was paying them nothing. And it would take the rest of my life and the rest of their lives for it to ever reach $300,000, and it still wouldn't reach $300,000 in the bank because the banks aren't paying us anything. So they were really happy with that suggestion and solution, and that's what we decided to implement for them. Now, if they get to the end of their days and they wake up and they're both angels, whatever's in the account value, the original deposit plus the interest, goes to the named beneficiary. So they never lost control of it. They never spent it, but that money would go to the beneficiary. And one of the guarantees is that the account value would never be invaded by cost or anything like that associated with the long-term care rider. So our process for meetings is our first meeting, we really focus on working with people in a financial planning capacity. And so we're not going to just be recommending products to anybody. There's no specific product that we represent. We are independent. We work with 100 different insurance companies. I mean, whoever has the best featured available solution for that client is the one that we're going to choose. So our first meeting is going to be very much informational gathering and really trying to understand your financial situation so that we can make a good recommendation in a second meeting. So the first meeting is gathering information, asking you a lot of questions that probably you've never heard. And the second meeting would be actually presenting you a financial plan, recommendations, and how the specific recommendations actually fit into your plan. And then there's not going to be a high pressure sales pitch or anything like that. It's if you want to make a decision to move forward, it's completely up to you. And the third meeting, we'll decide if you want to schedule it. If you want to schedule it, we'll be answering any questions and then deciding if you want to do anything that we recommended. Very, very simple, very, very straightforward. But we pride ourselves on doing a thorough job and always presenting something with an unbiased opinion. Without a plan, and I've seen this over and over throughout the years, it will create more confusion, frustration, guilt, fear, anxiety, added time and expense, and disagreement among siblings or peers. I want to go back to where I started, and I started with a personal story that helped me gain perspective. I used to talk to Pat all the time about her situation and what she went through. And she used to always tell me, Alex, we thought we were doing everything right. We hired a financial advisor from a credible firm. We worked with him. We thought we were getting financial planning. And we also, thought that we were completely safe and that we were on track. And it was never brought up to us to even consider long-term care protection. And as a result, we went through everything. And I'm telling you, we see it every single day. And I also teach at Oakland University. I've been teaching in their program since 2014. And I teach their risk management process, believe it or not, their class in their CFP program. And when we get to the topic on long-term care, I can see every advisor in the room, because they're all advisors that are in the business with experience, but I can see them light up because they're excited to learn about it, because they know how important it is. They've seen their clients go through it, and they want to understand it, and they want to know how it all works, and they're not getting the teaching at their current places. And so, I'm telling you, if you work with somebody, that's great. We're not trying to steal you away or a relationship. We'd like to complement that with something that people don't really understand. So please give us a shot. We'd love to help you, and we'd love to help you live a more secure and prosperous retirement. Thank you very much, and thank you for attending.
Thank you for attending our educational webinar on how to protect assets from long-term care expenses. Like both of our speakers had mentioned, it truly is one of the biggest risks to your retirement that is not always accounted for. It would be an honor to have the opportunity to serve you and your family. If you would like to discuss your specific situation, we would love to schedule a 15-minute introduction call to introduce ourselves to each other and see if we can help in any way. We can also address any more specific questions you had that were not answered in the Q&A or during the presentation. We would love to help anyone who is looking for it. So again, thank you for attending, and we wish you continued health and success going into the future. Have a great day. So Mike, we had a few questions coming in from the audience today. The first one is, if I place my assets in an irrevocable shelter trust, can I get money when I need it?
That's a great question. Yes, you can. Here's the procedure. If one of the children, one of your kids is your trustee, then if you read the trust, you're not a beneficiary of the trust. Only the kids are. So in that way, the assets can never be traced to you, and you can never be held ineligible for having the assets in the trust. So the kids can never give you money from the trust or pay a bill for you from the trust because you're not a beneficiary. So the kids have to take the money out of the trust, put it in their account, then they write you a check or pay your bill. So all the public sees is the kids are helping the parents. That's how that works. It's usually not an issue. We can set the trust up with what I call an intentional defect that causes any money that comes out of the trust to be taxable to the parent, not to the kid who takes it out. And the only money that's taxable is the interest that's been earned, because the money that went in is not taxable.
Understood. Thank you, Mike. The second question that has come in is, I have a living trust already, and my attorney said I am all set. Is that true?
Not if you want to shelter your assets from long-term care expenses. No, it's not true. A living trust, as I said, avoids probate, allows you to protect assets for, say, a child who has special needs, for a child who's a spendthrift and you want to protect the money for them. a child who's got a bad marriage and you want to make sure the spouse doesn't get any of the money. Those kinds of things. It works for that, avoids probate, but it doesn't protect any assets from long-term care expenses. You have to take the steps to create this irrevocable trust, get those assets legally away from you, but practically available to you.
Understood. Finally, the third question that has come in is, what if I do an irrevocable trust and then go into a nursing home before the 5-year look back passes? What happens then?
Okay, we have two choices. Let's say you make it 4 years and we got a year to go. We will run the numbers, we'll look at your pension, Social Security, what we have to take from your assets to pay for the nursing home until the 5 years is up. And if that is less money spent than we would spend if we pulled the money back to cure the divestment, divestment occurs when you put the money in the trust, then we'll do that. Say it's a year down the road and you go into a nursing home. Well, the Medicaid requires that we pull the money out of the trust and give it back to you. That's called curing the divestment. And then we would shelter it under one of the sheltering mechanisms that I briefly mentioned during the seminar. But those are all circumstance specific. So it depends on what your situation is. We'll run the numbers. We'll tell you, here's your numbers. What do you want to do? But we can shelter the money one way or another. I would just rather shelter it ahead of time than in a crisis situation.
Of course. Well, thank you, Mike, for answering those questions.
You're
and
welcome.
Thank you, audience, for providing us with those questions, and hope we provided you with good answers. Thanks. So, Alex, we had some questions come in from the audience.
Okay.
The first one is, if I wanted to get a long-term care hybrid policy and stay at home for care, what are the qualifications the person caring for me has to have in order for the policy to pay out? I have heard of times where these policies won't pay out in specific circumstances, like when a family member is helping.
That's a great question, and it really depends on what kind of policy that you purchase. So normally the qualifications are that the person has to be a licensed professional, maybe a care agency that you hire, but then there also are policies that will pay out to you directly, and then you can direct those payments to whomever you'd like. So there really is a lot of different options out there.
Great. Second question is, what is the process to get approved for one of these insurance policies?
So in that circumstance, and that's another good question, there is either full underwriting, what we call, where somebody has to actually take a physical exam. The insurance company is going to look at medical records of that individual and then make a determination on a rating, which the healthier you are, the cheaper the policy. And then the other way, for people that maybe have health concerns or health issues, prior histories, there are shorter underwriting types of products out there that can maybe just be like a telephone interview, and you can get approval for people that have pre-existing conditions a lot easier with. So again, depends, and each one of those things has their positives and negatives.
Thank you. Question number 3. I already have a life insurance policy that does not have a long-term care rider on it. Is there a way to move to one that does?
So I'm just going to say, first of all, anytime you're going to replace your current life insurance policy, you always want to make sure that you're having a professional do a thorough evaluation, and someone's not just trying to sell you something because your current policy may be very, very healthy, and the new policy you buy might not be as good. So you want to make sure you do a good evaluation. But the answer to the question is yes, you can. So some policies have cash value that they've built up, and you can do what's called a 1035 exchange, which allows you to, kind of like doing a rollover of an IRA to an IRA or a 401k to an IRA. You can move that cash value without any type of tax consequences. But again, evaluating the current policy is very important.
How does the payment from the policy get paid out? Do I keep the money and spend it myself?
So again, a lot of that depends on the type of policy you purchase. There are reimbursement and then there are indemnity policies. The reimbursement policies are the ones that are going to pay just for the amount of care that you actually incur. So if you have costs that equal $5,000 a month, they're going to reimburse you for the $5,000 in cost, and then you can pay that to the qualified care facility or caretaker. Then the indemnity policies will actually deposit the money directly into your account, and you can pay whomever you'd like. So that'd be a friend, a family, a neighbor. And again, both of those have their different positives and negatives.
Understood. So there's definitely a lot of options out there. Thank you, Alex, for the great presentation and the answers.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the audience
Thank you.
for the questions. We hope we provided you with some good answers. Thanks.
Thanks.